Hey there, viewers. When multiple high-profile pastors suddenly step down right before a major trial, people start asking why. Now, with reports that federal agents have uncovered disturbing footage tied to Diddy's case, the timing feels anything but random. Let's get into it. The offering plate was empty. I've been the treasurer at Greater Mission Tabernacle for 12 years now. I started out just helping count cash donations after Sunday service, back when we were still using folding tables in a rented gymnasium. The church grew, and I grew with it. These days we've got 3 services, a glass-walled office wing, and a sound system more expensive than my mortgage. But even with all the growth, I kept my little habits, like unlocking the sanctuary early on Monday mornings before anyone else showed up, just to walk through it alone. That's when I found it. The note. It was folded twice, tucked neatly in the center of the wooden offering plate, on the communion table. Nobody leaves anything in there. Not during the week. I didn't think much of it at first, figured it was someone's prayer request, maybe a pledge envelope that had been misplaced. But the second I touched it, something about it made me uneasy. It was heavy, for one, and the paper didn't feel like church stationery. It was thicker, unmarked. Inside were 5 words, written in pen, neat as anything. It's done, I've sinned. That's it. No address, no signature, no date. But I knew the handwriting. I've seen it on the backs of offering envelopes, sermon notes, and thank you cards mailed to visiting bishops. With pastors. I just stood there, staring at it for longer than I should have. The church was silent in that way that only big, empty buildings can be. I thought about calling someone, maybe Sister Tanya from the deacons board, maybe pastor's assistant, but my hands wouldn't move. I just folded the note back up and slipped it into my cardigan pocket like it was a receipt. He hadn't preached in 3 weeks. Said he was taking a short sabbatical, resting his voice, refilling his cup, all the usual spiritual euphemisms. But now that I thought about it, he hadn't even shown up last Sunday. Sent a video sermon instead, a looped message with grainy audio, played on the sanctuary screens while we sat in folding chairs wondering why it didn't quite feel like church. When I went back to the finance office, I pulled up the last few weeks of expense records. It was something I always did after weekends, especially when the big tithes came in. I wasn't trying to snoop, I just liked my numbers to line up. They didn't. There was a charge from a private charter service based in LAX, flight billed to a Soul Path Renewal Ministries, LLC. I'd never heard of it, and it wasn't one of our usual partner organizations. No paper trail. No linked tax ID, no record of them making a donation or co-hosting a conference. But our church card had covered part of the flight. The note in the memo field was just one word: retreat. The amount was just under the threshold that would have triggered a board signature. Just low enough to slide through. I started digging deeper, clicking through the past few months. There were hotel stays, one of them at a property I knew was adults only. A payment to a catering consultant with no listed service details. Another to a limousine company that only booked by referral. The names weren't familiar, but the timing aligned. Each charge within days of those spiritual retreats pastor kept mentioning in passing. That afternoon my phone buzzed. A message from Camille, a woman I knew from a different church on the other side of the state. We'd met at a women's retreat 2 years ago, stayed in touch through texts and the occasional prayer chain. The message just said, "Yours too." At first I didn't understand. I replied with a question mark. She didn't answer for a while, but when she did, it was a screenshot of a typed resignation letter. No salutation, just a statement. Effective immediately, I resign from my duties. I am unfit to lead. Forgive me. It was signed by their pastor. One of the most respected ministers in that part of the state. Known for fiery sermons and televised revivals. Just stepped down. Like that. I texted back, "What happened?" She just wrote, "No one will say, but I heard he was in LA around the same time as yours." I didn't reply. Instead, I went back to the church vault where we store the older personnel files, things nobody really looks at unless there's a tax audit or a background check. I opened Pastor's folder, just stared at the papers. I don't even know what I was expecting to find. Maybe something scratched in the margins, some clue he'd left for whoever came looking. There was nothing. But that night, after I got home and made tea, I took the letter out of my pocket again, ran my fingers over the paper. It was thick, textured, almost like handmade stock, not something we kept in the office. I turned it over, nothing on the back, but then I held it up to the lamp just out of habit. There were marks, faint ones, pressed into the back of the page, like someone had written on a different sheet over top of this one. I squinted, trying to make it out. A phrase. Maybe 2 words. It looked like, "They won't find it." I blinked, looked again. Yes. He said they would never find the footage. My stomach twisted. I sat there in the quiet, tea going cold beside me. A phrase like that doesn't belong in a church office, not in a resignation, not from a man who always ended his notes with blessings or psalms or at least the word grace. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept hearing that phrase in my head. They would never find the footage. Footage of what? Where? Who was he? The next morning, I checked the news. Nothing about our church, nothing about Camille's either. Just another story about that upcoming celebrity trial, the one involving Diddy. I didn't click it. I didn't need to. Because 3 of the names mentioned in passing, spiritual advisors, unnamed consultants, visiting clergy. I knew them. I'd seen them. One of them had preached at our New Year's revival 2 years ago. And now they were gone, quietly stepping down. No statements. That afternoon, I received another message, this one from an unfamiliar number. No name, just a line of text. "You should destroy the note." I dropped the phone. My hands shook as I picked it up again. I texted back, "Who is this?" But it never delivered. The contact vanished from my history within the hour. I went back to the church late that night. Brought the note with me. I stood in the sanctuary, completely alone. The only light came from the stained glass moonlight spilling through the windows. I wanted to leave the letter where I found it, like maybe that would undo whatever I'd stirred up. But I didn't. I walked back to the altar and opened the plate and found a second letter already inside. Different handwriting, but the same weight, folded twice. I opened it. We only ever borrowed the altar. It was never ours. I ran, locked the doors. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I filed a maintenance request to have the sanctuary cameras checked. I claimed there'd been a break-in, but when the janitor pulled the tapes, he said the footage was corrupted, that the camera in the sanctuary hadn't been working since the first week of Pastor's retreat. It still isn't working, and the plate is still empty. Chapter 2, The Off-Record Retreat. Never meant to get wrapped up in any of this. I was just a security guy. No badge, no federal training, just a contract worker with a clean record and a strong back. When I started doing protection gigs for churches and high-end events, it felt like a step up from bar bouncing. More suits, fewer fights, easier money, cleaner hours. Around late 2022, though, things started to shift. The requests were still coming from ministries, or at least they looked like they were. The paperwork had logos, Bible verses, nonprofit seals. But the contacts were different. I stopped getting calls from church secretaries and started hearing from private assistants who didn't give last names. They'd text instead of call. No voicemail, just initials. One of the first red flags should have been how much they were willing to pay. I'd get offered 5 times my usual rate for weekend coverage, no questions asked. Spiritual restoration retreats, they called them. They'd fly pastors and faith leaders out to places like Miami or the hills outside LA, always secluded properties, gated, luxurious, too much space for the number of guests. I'd be hired to cover things like perimeter security, bag checks, transport watch. Sounded easy. I thought I'd be watching over prayer circles or some weekend-long fast. But these weren't prayer meetings, not really. The first one that stuck in my head happened in Atlanta. They'd rented out a massive mansion up in the woods, looked like something from a billionaire's vision board. Marble floors, chandeliers hanging over open lounges, staff wearing matching black, no name tags, no small talk. There were pastors, big ones, recognizable if you knew the circuit. A few gospel musicians, too. Everyone was brought in on first-class tickets. Some had handlers with them, like they weren't trusted to go alone. I was told to station myself at the back patio after sundown. My job was to make sure no one wandered out or got lost. They didn't explain what that meant. One of the assistants called himself R. Gave me a thick envelope before the night started. "You didn't see anything tonight," he said. "You're here to keep the peace, not play detective." That should have been my cue to walk. But I didn't. I stayed. Money as a way of quieting your instincts. The early evening looked like what you'd expect. People in white linen outfits, candles lit across the stone steps, music that sounded halfway between gospel and trance, people holding hands and singing. But when the sun went down, things changed. They moved everyone inside. I wasn't allowed near the main room then. They put me by the hallway leading to the west wing, right outside a door that was always closed. That's when I noticed something else. The cameras. I'd done enough events to recognize when something was being watched. This wasn't standard security surveillance. These cameras were built into the walls. One-way glass, positioned not to catch intruders, but to film the guests, and they were angled low, at seating height, like whoever was watching wanted to see reactions, expressions, surrender. I asked one of the assistants if that was standard. He looked at me and said, "They're here for reflection, this is spiritual work." He said it like it explained everything. There was a woman who came out of the main room around 10 p.m., shaking, no shoes. She asked me if I had water, and when I offered her a bottle, she grabbed my arm. "You don't understand what this is," she whispered. "This isn't worship, this is a trade." Before I could ask what she meant, someone from inside called her name. She smiled at me, like an apology, and walked back in. Later that night, my post shifted. They asked me to escort a guest to the lower level, a man in his 50s, bald, wearing a long cream robe and gold necklace that looked more ceremonial than religious. Said he needed to rest, but instead of a bedroom, I took him to a room with thick soundproofing foam and dim red lights lining the walls. There were velvet benches arranged in a triangle, and in the center of the room, a table with incense burning. I wasn't supposed to look, but I did. Mounted behind a sheet of tinted glass, maybe a two-way mirror, was a camera lens. Just one, focused on the center of the triangle. As I left him there, I heard something playing through a speaker, a voice, deep, measured, rhythmic. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew the voice. Everyone knew that voice. It was Diddy. Just one phrase, repeating every few seconds like a chant. "Do not return unbroken." I never asked questions again. A few weeks later, I got a new job. Similar gig, this time in a hilltop property outside LA, not far from where a certain producer used to throw parties. Everything looked the same: pastors, white clothing, candlelight. No phones allowed. Devices were checked at the gate and locked in metal safes with numbered tags. This time I was assigned near the basement. He assisted. I think it was a different one, but same tone, same quiet threats. Told me, you may hear things, you may see them come back different, don't inter. He kept it running until almost 3 a.m. I never saw what happened inside, but I saw who left. There were tears, confusion. One man kept asking for his wife, though she wasn't on the guest list. Another pastor muttered something about atonement, and one refused to speak entirely. After that retreat, I turned down every other offer they sent. The money wasn't worth the unease that crawled up my spine every time I closed my eyes. I tried to forget, moved on, took normal gigs, worked for hotels, private weddings, nothing that involved velvet, robes, or cameras you couldn't see until it was too late. But that ended last week. The package arrived. No return address. Just my name, handwritten, no postage. It was placed outside the apartment in a black envelope sealed with wax. Inside was a flash drive. No note. I plugged it in, shouldn't have, but I did. The file had no title, just a timestamp, October 4th, 23, -2:47 a.m. It showed one of the retreat rooms. The triangle setup, red lighting. A man sat in the center, hands bound behind his back, though not roughly, like it was part of the process. The camera panned, slow, deliberate, and the voice, that same voice, do not return unbroken. The man on camera began to weep, not from pain, from something else. Shame or memory, it was hard to tell. Then a second voice, deeper, closer to the mic, unmistakable now. His voice, this is what obedience looks like. The file cut off, no fade, just static. Then a second file opened on its own. Text only, no sender. Don't run, just watch. I pulled the drive, burned it in the sink, and still I hear it when I close my eyes. The way they knew it, the way they filmed it, the way they always said the same thing. They're here for reflection. They were there for capture. And I helped build the cage, the book they never preached from. I wasn't meant to be anything more than a helper, an echo, someone who nodded at the right moments and repeated the lines they gave me. I didn't have the pedigree, no famous father, no theology degree from the big schools. I came up through the youth ministry, passed through enough prayer circles to be noticed, and eventually stood just close enough to the pulpit to be useful, but never essential. That was fine by me. I liked the background, less light, less heat. But I remember the day I got the book. It was a Thursday. Late summer, humid in a way that pressed into your lungs. I had just finished helping prep a sermon outline for the weekend. Something about spiritual obedience and the illusion of free will. Nothing unusual. As I was packing up, the senior minister called me into his office. He didn't smile, just motioned for me to close the door. He said a gift had arrived for me. From a mutual friend out west. That's how he said it, like a password. No name, just direction. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a leather-bound book. No title, no author. The cover was dark brown, smooth but scarred. There was a clasp on the side, made of metal, that felt heavier than it looked. I held it like it might burn me. I asked what it was. He said it was a devotional, not for public use. He added, "This one's for your preparation, your advancement." The way he said advancement, it didn't sound like he meant my career. It sounded older than that. When I opened the book that night in my apartment, I didn't find scripture. No verses, no hymns, no commentary on the Gospels. Instead, I found columns of names, some full, some just initials. Underneath them were dates and phrases written in strange shorthand I didn't understand at first. Tide cycle confirmed, 3 arrivals. Obedience, Tier 2 granted, white cloth only. Nocturne access requested, no O verified. The pages weren't numbered. Some had torn edges, like they'd been added after the fact. There were sketches, symbols drawn in red ink that resembled old seals or insignias I couldn't place, triangles, twisted crosses, a spiral with words circling the inside like a snake eating its tail. In the center of the book was a 2-page spread with a diagram. It looked like a seating chart. Oval, 12 chairs, 1 raised platform in the middle. Each seat was labeled with a title, not a name. The witness, the carrier, the anointed, the shepherd. I didn't sleep that night. The book was still on my kitchen table the next morning, closed but somehow louder than when it was open. I couldn't stop thinking about the names, the titles, the way the handwriting changed every few pages, like multiple people had added to it over time. I thought about giving it back. But who would I give it to? Instead, I put it in a drawer and tried to forget it. Told myself it was some sort of private religious material. Maybe a theological exercise I wasn't yet ready to understand. That's what I told myself, over and over. But then I started noticing things. The dates listed in the book, they matched events I recognized. Private charity galas. Kingdom conferences held in beachfront properties. Nights where certain pastors would vanish for a weekend and return changed. One date in particular hit hard. A retreat in 2023, supposedly in Malibu. I hadn't been invited, but I heard about it. I saw the photos after. The smiling faces, the white linens. One of the names listed in the book was there, but he wasn't smiling in the photo. He looked like he'd just survived something. Or hadn't. Months went by. I kept the book hidden. The church grew quieter around me. The senior minister retired for health reasons. His replacement was even more silent. The sermons became vaguer, more theatrical, less about salvation, more about submission. The trial buzz started. Not from the pulpit, not in the news. Just whispers in parking lots, pastors stepping down, congregations losing their leaders with no explanation. Words like footage and rooms and deals floated through the air like pollen. Then, one night, a black car pulled up outside my apartment. Tinted windows, parked across the street. It didn't move for hours. I didn't sleep. By morning it was gone. But I knew what I had to do. I took the book to the sink, poured lighter fluid on it, and lit the match. It didn't burn like paper should. It curled and hissed, but the cover stayed intact for longer than I thought possible. I held it down with tongs, kept the flame on it until it was ash and melted leather. I dumped it all into a trash bag, tied it tight, walked it down the block to a construction dumpster. I thought that was it. 2 weeks later, I got a padded envelope in my mailbox. No return address. My name was printed on the front, not handwritten, typed, the kind of label you'd print from an office machine. Inside were ashes. Not paper, just fine, black ash, and something small. A metal charm. It was shaped like the insignia from the center of the book, the spiral snake eating itself. When I touched it, it felt warm. There was no note, no explanation, just that symbol. A reminder. I kept it for a while, in a drawer, taped inside an envelope I didn't open. But sometimes, at night, I swear I'd hear it rattle. Not from movement, but like it was trying to shift or breathe. A week after that, my front door was unlocked when I got home from work. Nothing was stolen, but the kitchen light was on, and there was a single folded page on the table. Type, and never needed you to believe it, just to carry it. I've never told anyone this. Not really. I tried to forget, tried to stay in the margins. I figured as long as I didn't open my mouth, I'd be safe. But the charm still sits in my closet, wrapped in cloth, hidden. And some nights, I find the drawer cracked open, as if it's reminding me. As if the book I burned still exists, somewhere, waiting to be rewritten. And I don't know who the mutual friend out west was, but I have a feeling I've heard his voice before. In music, in prayer, in confession, the velvet baptism. I've worked at the Bureau for 7 years now, most of it behind screens. I wasn't a field agent, I didn't carry a weapon, I didn't get yelled at in hallways or sit across from criminals in interrogation rooms. My job was quieter, lonelier, tech analyst for a special task force that handled encrypted media, recovered drives, corrupt video files, anything digital that might be evidence but needed coaxing before anyone could make sense of it. 90% of the time, what I got was junk. Shaky drug deal footage, incomplete transactions, blurry camera footage of people stuffing cash into cars or whispering names into prepaid phones. You see enough of it, it all starts to look the same. That's why I didn't think much when a courier dropped off a plastic evidence bag marked Miscellaneous Media, Scene 14, USB. The drive wasn't labeled, no identifying stickers. Plain black casing, one of those cheap bulk ones you can buy by the 100. According to the form, it was pulled from a safe during a trafficking raid on a known associate of a local entertainment mogul. It was unrelated to any ongoing trial. Low perimeter digital artifact, the tag read. I logged it, scanned it, no malware, no trace signatures, so I loaded it onto the air-gapped unit in the lab. The one we use when we don't want anything leaking into the network. The first file was only 3 minutes and 47 seconds long. It had no title, just a string of numbers, like a scrambled timestamp. I clicked it open. What I saw stopped me cold. The footage was handheld, night vision green, slightly shaky. No audio at first. It showed a group of men walking into a dim room, lit entirely by candles placed in a circle. Most of them were wearing clergy robes or partial collars. One wore a white sash across his shoulder. Another had a stole embroidered with a strange sigil I didn't recognize. 2 circles interlocked, with jagged lines running through the center. In the corner of the room was a tub, like a baptismal pool, but it wasn't filled with water. Whatever was in there was darker. Thicker. The fabric hanging behind it was velvet, burgundy, draped like a stage curtain, the edges pinned tightly to the wall as if trying to conceal something even deeper behind it. The men formed a semicircle around the tub. None of them looked at the camera. Most kept their heads bowed, but one man stood in the center, facing the others. He spoke. The voice wasn't Diddy's, but it was calm, deliberate, trained. He sounded like someone used to giving sermons, like someone who had studied silence until it obeyed him. The shepherd provided this path, he said. Let us thank the host. There was laughter, not loud, low, almost embarrassed, like the kind you hear in a room where no one wants to be the first to leave. Then something was chanted, not in English, maybe Latin, I couldn't tell. I ran audio extraction in the background, isolating the frequencies, but the words were slurred, either from the recording or from their mouths. One of the pastors, an older man with silver hair and trembling hands, stepped forward. He knelt beside the tub. The others placed their hands on his back. He began crying, not the kind of weeping that comes from joy or release. It was the sound of someone remembering something they never wanted to admit they knew. Then the video skipped. Just like that, frame break, like a missing strip of film. When it returned, the room was empty. All the candles were still lit, burning steadily. The tub was still there. So were the robes, draped across the benches. But the men were gone. except for one. He was standing in the corner, just barely in frame, his face partially lit by candlelight, half in shadow. He looked directly at the lens, no blinking, no expression, like he'd been waiting for it. He leaned in, very slightly, mouthed something. Then the file ended. I replayed it 3 times. Each time, the whispering part, whatever he said, felt more deliberate. I loaded the audio into our forensic isolation software, applied a spectrogram, boosted the mids, lowered the ambient noise, focused on the final 3 seconds. What he said was clear now. It's not baptism if no one gets out. I sat back from the screen. It reviewed cartel decapitations. I've transcribed conversations between traffickers planning cross-border transfers. I once decrypted a folder that turned out to be a recording of a torture session that had never been reported. But none of those stayed with me the way that sentence did. I logged the file, created a mirror copy, filled out the internal form requesting a case link review. But the request was denied. Artifact not directly related to open investigations. Proceed with disposal per protocol. Disposal. I reread the request denial 3 times. There were names in that video, faces I recognized, not personally, but from previous files. Some of them had been interviewed during other inquiries. A few were on unofficial protected contacts lists. Names that often appeared in clusters but never ended up on the official indictment sheets. One had been named in a civil case years ago. Another had ties to a non-profit registered in multiple states but reporting 0 activity. I flagged the file, made a second copy. I wasn't supposed to, but I did. I stored it in an external archive, hidden inside a redundant diagnostics folder. That afternoon, someone from internal called me, asked why I was pulling timestamp metadata from an unrelated case file, said it triggered a review notice. I lied. Said it was cross-referenced by mistake. That I'd delete the backup, that I hadn't opened anything yet. They told me not to worry, that someone else would finish reviewing the drive, that I'd be reassigned to a different workload. When I returned to my office, my access to the air-gapped unit had been revoked. I walked out of the building that night with my badge, feeling heavier than usual. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about that room, about the velvet, the robes, the tub, the phrase. The shepherd provided this path, and how the voice said host like it wasn't just a figure of speech. I didn't sleep. In the early morning, I checked the mirror copy. The video was gone. The entire diagnostics folder had vanished. In its place, a single image. A still frame from the footage. That same man, staring into the lens. Except this time, his eyes were closed. And below the image, one line of text appeared. We all went under. That was 3 nights ago. And every time I close my eyes now, I see the candles still burning. Like someone forgot to blow them out. Or chose not to. Chapter 5. The house where time went backward. They called me in as a formality. Some bank out of Chicago had finally gotten court clearance to liquidate the place after years of it sitting idle. Property seized from a former entertainment manager. Never indicted, but publicly distanced from everything once the Cohn's trial kicked up. The estate was tied up in shell companies, trust funds, NDAs so thick you couldn't breathe around them. But legally, it was available for reassessment now. So that's where I came in. I'd done hundreds of appraisals in my time. Old money, new money, no money. I'd walked through Hollywood Hills homes that felt more like movie sets than places people actually lived. So I didn't expect anything unusual when I pulled up the winding drive off Mulholland and saw the gates of the house. Tall wrought iron, twisted like vines, capped with gold fleur-de-lis. They opened before I even pressed the buzzer. The place didn't look haunted, it looked staged, too clean, too preserved. like someone had frozen a moment from 5 years ago and left it under glass. Even the driveway was spotless. No leaves, no cracks, just smooth gray concrete leading up to a 3-story Mediterranean-style villa with arched doorways and manicured hedges. The real estate agent was already waiting inside. She had the keys, but she didn't join me for the walkthrough. Said she had another call, and I seemed like the kind of guy who liked to be alone with the place. She smiled when she said it, but it didn't feel like a compliment. I started with the basics. Foundation, roofing, electrical box, everything top of the line, nothing out of place. But I didn't make it 30 minutes before I noticed something was wrong. The blueprint they'd sent me showed 2 stories and a basement storage level. Simple enough, but on the actual walkthrough, I found a staircase that wasn't marked. It led down from behind a false panel in the hallway closet. One of those closets you assume is just for coats or linens. The staircase was narrow, covered in burgundy carpet worn down in the middle. It felt like descending into a theater, airless and dramatic, no lights. I had to use my phone flashlight. When I reached the bottom, I found a single hallway. 3 doors. One was locked. One led to a standard utility room with stacked generators and soundproofing equipment. Nothing fancy, just cold and humming. But the 3rd door, it didn't match the rest of the house. It was old wood, darker than the rest, with a brass handle and carved edges. Someone had etched a phrase into the doorframe. Deep, deliberate strokes. I didn't recognize the language at first, but I took a photo. Later would run it through a translator. They kneel not for grace, but for recall. Inside the room there were no electrical outlets, no switches, just a low ceiling, a padded floor like an old recording studio, and 4 walls lined with velvet. Not just curtains, full upholstered walls in deep crimson, like someone wanted sound not just dampened but absorbed, taken, hidden. On the far wall I spotted something even more unnerving. Reflective glass, 2-way mirror. Behind it, I could see the faint outline of a mounted lens, a camera. Not new, dusty, like it had been there for a long time, turned off but not forgotten. There were no chairs, just cushions arranged in a tight triangle around a silver dish, now empty but stained in the center. The air smelled faintly of incense, like clove and wine and something vaguely metallic. I backed out. My breath was shallow by the time I got back upstairs. I told myself I was overreacting, that people with money build strange things. Panic rooms, recording spaces, theaters. This could have been any of those. With that door frame, I went back later with a crowbar and cracked open the locked cabinet in the cellar. Inside were bins, weatherproof, labeled. One held piles of folded velvet cloths tied with gold thread. Another had bundles of long incense sticks marked with symbols. But the 3rd bin, that's the one that made me sit down on the concrete floor and stare. It was full of papers. And there were folders with initials, flight logs, guest lists. It looked like event planning materials. If your events were private, international, and included pastors from 4 different states, there were schedules labeled alignment weeks. A printed seating chart with 12 positions, 3 labeled with crosses, the rest marked only by initials. And then a roster. The 1 page, handwritten, dozens of entries, no full names, just 2-letter codes and city locations. JM Dallas, LB Savannah, TR Chicago. I recognized some of those initials from news reports, recent resignations, pastors stepping down for health reasons, moral clarity. One had just vanished entirely. I photographed the last page. Just in case, I reported the cabinet. Told the asset management team they needed a full forensic sweep. The agent nodded, said they'd send a secondary team. 3 weeks later, the house burned to the ground. Electrical fault, the report said. No injuries, no arrests, no clear cause. The velvet room, the cabinet, the mirrored lens, all gone. But I still have the photo, and sometimes I stare at it late at night, zooming in, wondering if those initials were ever meant to be read at all. If maybe they weren't a list, but an invitation. A roll call. Or a confession. I can't stop thinking about that phrase carved into the frame. They kneel not for grace, but for recall. Your call of what? Other of who? And did I help erase it by letting the fire come? Maybe. But part of me wonders if the house didn't burn by accident. Maybe it couldn't stand anymore. Maybe the past it held got too heavy. In day and time, and that house didn't move forward like it does for the rest of us. It circled, waited, replayed. And then, when no one was left to watch, it let go. Chapter 6. The names that weren't meant to be heard. I worked as an audio engineer for a faith-based media network for almost 8 years. We weren't a TV station or anything flashy, just a quiet operation tucked behind a suburban church complex, warehouse-sized building full of servers, edit bays, and dusty storage drives. My job was to clean up audio, sermons, conferences, retreats, strip out coughs, fix mic hums, normalize vocals, that kind of thing. Most days it was dull. Pastors preaching to stadium crowds, prayer lines stretched across state fairs, little kids misquoting verses during Sunday school, hundreds of hours of praise and pause. But then came a job that was different. It wasn't on the schedule. It came in through a locked black case, hand-delivered, no markings. Inside were 7 thumb drives, no labels, no project sheet, just a note in a sealed envelope. Archive as received, no edits. It was signed by someone high up in the hierarchy. I recognized the name, a senior figure, the kind of man whose name got whispered more than spoken. I loaded the first file out of curiosity, expecting another revival recording or a new devotional podcast series. But what came through my headset was silence. Not empty, not static, just held silence, like a room waiting to breathe. Then came ambient sounds, chairs scraping, soft footsteps, someone clearing their throat, far off mic. No one introduced the speaker. No one prayed. Then a voice came in, not loud, not commanding, just there. Let them enter, one by one. They must sit in the order we rehearsed. That was the first sentence. No scripture, no sermon, no context. The voice continued slowly, with long gaps in between. Do not speak until the water has been poured. Do not make eye contact until the witness has turned. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a mic left running before an actual service began. But each file was like this. Carefully timed, carefully spoken instructions. Guidance, not commands. Each session had a name, not of a speaker, but of a phase. Vision. Recognition. Reversal. Each one was stranger than the last. There were occasional sounds, low murmurs, single chimes, sometimes faint sobbing. I archived them like I was told, but on the 7th file, I couldn't help myself. I saved a copy. Not to expose anything, just in case. I labeled it Session G and hid it inside a folder of Easter concert recordings on an offline drive. That was 2 years ago. Then came the Diddy rumors. The trial whispers. The mentions of clergy, of recordings, of something else. Something deeper. I remembered the voice from the sessions. How it didn't sound like it was meant to be heard later. Like a sermon or a podcast. It sounded like it was meant to bind. I played the seventh file again. With new ears, new questions. This time, I noticed something I hadn't before. Low music, layered beneath the audio. Not worship, not even instrumental. It was atmospheric, almost synthetic. But there was rhythm, pattern. I pulled the track into my workstation and began isolating the layers. One of the back channels had a melodic signature, familiar. I cross-checked it against some old sample packs from industry libraries, no match. Then I remembered something from a leak site that had posted stems from unreleased Diddy sessions, vault tracks never published, some of them scrapped due to creative differences. I ran a scan. Much. The music playing faintly behind the Deliverance session matched a track that he had recorded years ago and never released. Same key, same chord progression, same ambient percussion loop. I sat there staring at the waveform. It wasn't just sermons being recorded. It wasn't just prayers. These were rituals, scored, layered, embedded with sound, engineered by someone with access to production tools far outside a church's budget. I checked the metadata. The file had no creation date. The timestamp had been stripped and rewritten. But one line in the hidden header file remained. Leap 3 souls in. My breath caught. I went back to the voice. The same calm, unmoved tone. Would exercise. Let them chant. Let them weep. You are recording souls now. I pulled off my headset. I don't remember how long I sat there. The next day I returned to the lab. I decided I would delete the copy, destroy the whole drive if I had to. But when I opened the folder, the WAV file was gone. In its place, a new file had appeared. A .xt file. I opened it. One line. Delete the WAV files, all of them. I looked at the timestamp. It had been created at 2:47 a.m. while my machine was offline. No one had access to that drive. It had no connection to the internet, no Bluetooth, no ports open, no devices attached. I checked the system log. No activity recorded. I formatted the entire drive, wiped it 3 times over, then I took it to a salvage yard and smashed it with a hammer before throwing it into the disposal bin. But that night, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. You still hear them? No reply, number disconnected. I tried to sleep. I couldn't. The next morning, I opened my laptop to check emails. A new audio file was waiting in my drafts folder. No subject, no sender. Just a WAV file named Reconciliation. I played it. There was only one voice. One sentence. This is not recording, this is remembering. I deleted it, pulled the battery, threw the laptop out. But I still hear that session sometimes. When the house is quiet, when the power goes out, the ambient hum, the soft sobs, and always that voice just above a whisper. You are recording souls now. Maybe I was. Maybe I still am. Jim Shingley, he said this to himself. The rooms inside the rooms life-changing, life-giving, life-giving. Jeb's inquiries, it was just supposed to clean. That's all they told me. Sweep the basement hallways, mop the lower bathrooms, wipe down any surface that looked used. Never touch anything that was already covered. Don't move the wine glasses. Don't open doors with no number, and never go up to the 3rd floor. That last one was repeated twice during the briefing. The man giving it wasn't rude. He didn't raise his voice, but he said it with a flatness that let me know it wasn't optional. Just the basement, after sundown. I took the job because the pay was triple what I'd made cleaning hotel rooms. They called it a temporary housekeeping contract for a religious retreat compound outside Santa Rosa. Seasonal spiritual maintenance was how it read on the form. The property was enormous, gated from the main road, hidden behind rows of oak trees. Not old, but styled to feel ancient. Stucco walls, stone pillars, gravel paths leading to archways that didn't open into anything. The other staff didn't talk much. We were all on different shifts, and I rarely saw the guests. I'd arrive in the evening, clock in with a handwritten logbook, take the basement keys from the hook, and do my rounds with a flashlight because they always asked us not to turn on the main lights. They prefer candlelight, the supervisor said. Preserves the atmosphere. Most of the rooms in the basement were plain, spare dorms, empty conference lounges with ringed carpet stains. But two of the corridors curved deeper into the hillside. One led to a chamber that always smelled like incense and lemon oil. Another, even deeper, was almost always locked. Except once. There was a storm that night. Power had flickered. I was told to skip cleaning and just check for leaks or pooling water. I passed the unmarked door like usual, but this time it was slightly ajar. Just enough to let me see the light glowing underneath. I shouldn't have looked. I know that now, but curiosity is a slippery thing. It doesn't knock. It pushes. Inside the room were 3 pulpits. They weren't like any I'd seen in churches. These were polished black wood, carved with patterns I didn't recognize. They weren't facing a crowd. They were angled inward, toward the center of the room. There were no pews, just 3 triangular cushions on the floor, arranged in a perfect triangle. Each cushion had 3 objects placed neatly on it. A folded white cloth, a glass of dark wine, and a laminated quote. I stepped in without thinking, just a few feet. The floor felt soft, like velvet stretched over padding. I leaned down and read the nearest quote. The print was small, typed in a clean serif font. No name, just a line. Do not preach to the weak, perform for the powerful. My stomach turned. The second quote read, we lead not to guide, but to mirror. The third, when the host watches, you do not kneel, you offer. It's when I heard the door creak behind me. I turned so fast I dropped my flashlight, scrambled for it in the dark. But no one was there. The door hadn't moved. No breeze, no footsteps. I backed out slowly, heart pounding. The next day, the door was locked again. I never told anyone. Not then, but I started paying attention after that. To who arrived, to who left. The compound wasn't just for church retreats, not anymore. There were men who came in tinted cars, women with clipboards who didn't wear crosses, assistants with sunglasses at night. I saw 3 pastors I recognized from televised. They all entered through the back, where no cameras were ever allowed. Years later, I saw their names again. One retired suddenly, due to illness. One went missing after a speaking tour in South America. The third was found in his apartment. Cause of death, natural causes. No autopsy. No funeral footage. No eulogies. It's gone. That's when I couldn't keep it in anymore. Found someone who was building a sealed file. Someone who wasn't talking to the press, who didn't want money, just evidence. I gave my statement. Everything I'd seen. The quotes, the cushions, the pulpit angles. They asked if I kept anything. I said no, but that wasn't true. I kept one of the laminated quotes. I don't know why. Maybe to prove it to myself later. Maybe because I knew, deep down, that no one would believe me without something to touch. There was the first one, the one about the week. Keep it in an envelope under my bed. Still smells faintly of wine and lavender. Some nights I take it out, read it, feel the raised texture of the laminate's edge. It still scares me. Not because of what it says, but because of how many people must have read it and agreed. Because those weren't churches. Those were stages. And God never walked in. Chapter 8. The tape that made them resign. I've been working in the Federal Records Division for 4 years now. It's the kind of job most people don't think about until a leak happens. No badge, no gun, no courtroom drama. Just a cold desk in a gray office and a database that never stops humming. I'm one of the people who handles sealed pre-trial materials, uploading, cross-checking metadata, assigning access tiers. It's quiet work, bureaucrat safe, or at least it used to be. The file didn't come through the right channel. It was tucked into a case folder labeled Third-Party Archive Venue Permits. It shouldn't have had video content at all, just scanned contracts and rental agreements from previous event venues related to the investigation. I almost skipped over it, but the file caught my eye because of its size. Just under 300 MB, too large for a simple PDF. And the extension wasn't .pdf at all. It was .mov. I clicked it without thinking, like I've done 1,000 times. It opened in our preview player. No buffering, no warning. The footage was grainy, time-stamped. The digital noise suggested it had been through multiple re-encodings. There was no title screen, no audio at first, just the hiss of ambient static and a dim, red room coming into focus. A velvet curtain covered the back wall. A candle flickered in the corner, casting shadows across the floor. 3 figures came into frame. The first was a woman, kneeling, hair pulled back, motionless. The second was a man, seated behind an organ keyboard, fingers resting on the keys, but not yet playing. And the third was unmistakable. He didn't speak at first, just placed a hand on the pastor's shoulder. Because yes, the fourth person in frame, now entering from the side, was a pastor. One of the most well-known in the country. His face was everywhere a year ago. Book tours, stadium revivals, televised sermons. If you've ever walked through an airport bookstore in the South, you've seen his face on a glossy cover, promising breakthrough or deliverance or something else that sounds just vague enough to mean anything. In the footage, he wasn't preaching. He was weeping. He stood in front of a small podium, low, like a music stand, flipping through pages of a contract. The woman beside him never looked up. The organist played a low chord that never quite resolved. Then the pastor spoke. Not to God. To someone off screen. He started listing names, not in order, just first names, last initials, city affiliations. At first, I didn't understand what they meant, but as he continued, it became clear. He was identifying people, not just attendees, collaborators, facilitators. It wasn't a sermon. It was a confession. And then he said something I will never forget. This is not forgiveness. This is exchange. The camera zoomed slightly, and for the briefest second, I could see what was etched on the podium's front panel. It was a symbol. 2 interlocking rings with a downward-pointing triangle in the center. I'd seen it before, on a scan of an altar cloth from a previous case, the same cloth that had been confiscated from a renewal compound in Georgia. The pastor signed the paper. Diddy leaned in and whispered something, too faint to hear. The organist struck one final note. Then the file glitched. Eruption wave. The screen tore sideways, and the footage ended. But I had already downloaded it. I sat still for a long time. My hands were sweating. I had done nothing wrong, technically. I opened an improperly filed document, flagged it, and logged the chain of access. I forwarded it to my supervisor. He didn't respond. Not that day. Both. But the next morning, I heard the news. 4 pastors, big names, announced their resignation within hours of each other. No press conferences, no letters to their congregations, just silent exits. Websites wiped, socials deactivated. One church removed every archived sermon from their channel. No explanation, no reason given. The clerk across from me said it was probably coincidence. They probably knew the storm was coming, she said. Jumped ship before it hit. But I knew what they saw. Or what someone showed them. That night, I went back into the system to delete the file. It wasn't there. The folder was empty, the metadata scrubbed. I checked the backup, still gone. But when I opened my personal work folder, the one I used to store templates and format macros, I saw a file that didn't belong. Gospel_witness_return_final. I didn't put it there. I checked the timestamp. It had been created at 3:13 a.m. The preview thumbnail showed a still image of the pastor, mid-sentence, eyes closed, mouth open, mid-confession. I right-clicked it, tried to delete. The system froze. Then the screen flashed once. The file remained. I opened the properties window. Hidden in the metadata was a message. Whoever had compiled the drive had left it buried in the comments section. It read, "Forgive them. Or don't. Just don't forget what they wore when they bowed." I closed the laptop, unplugged it, sat on the floor of my apartment, lights off, holding my breath like that would stop whatever had started. I don't know who sent the file. I don't know why it came to me. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I was just next in line. But I know this. The footage was real. The names were real. And the tape didn't destroy their reputations. It reminded them, not what they did, of where they knelt, and who they did it for.